Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Mason's Homecoming at Home and to our panel discussion focused on military and veteran career transitions. My name is Bill Skimmyhorn, and I'll be your moderator for the event. Today's event will bring together recent and experienced William & Mary veteran alumni to discuss a number of timely topics surrounding transition. In a moment, we'll have our panelists provide a brief introduction before moving to the heart of the event, a series of targeted, moderated questions. Before doing that, I wanted to make two brief announcements. First, I'd like to share with this audience some exciting news. Thanks to a $10 million gift from an anonymous alumna, the university is developing a cutting-edge veteran to executive transition program known as William & Mary VET that will prepare veterans to excel in civilian leadership roles. President Rowe recently noted about this effort. We see our new program as an opportunity not only to accelerate the professional transitions of highly skilled and experienced men and women, but also to approach holistically William & Mary's wide array of programming for military students and veterans. An important part of this effort is a gift to the Mason School to establish the Center for Veteran Transitions, as you'll see depicted here. The Center for Veteran Transition will coordinate programs and facilitate access to vital resources for veterans and their family members, including professional development and career guidance, networking opportunities with the Mason School's vast alumni veteran population and corporations interested in supporting veterans, mentorship by those who have successfully moved from their time in service to the civilian world, and wellness programs available through a partnership with the On-Campus Wellness Center. You can find more information about the broader William & Mary Veteran Program, as well as the Center for Veteran Transitions on the William & Mary website. Please stay tuned for more information on these programs as it becomes available. Secondly, I just want to thank everyone for their attendance at today's event and encourage your continued engagement this morning. You should feel free to submit questions for any or all of our panelists through the question and answer and chat function at the bottom of your screen. These questions will comprise the final portion of this morning's discussion. It's my great pleasure to welcome our four panelists for this morning's event. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a moment. We have Bill Buzz Busby, MBA 1984, Jamar Jenkins, MBA 2018 and MS 2020, Mike Petters, MBA 1993, and Sally Ryan, MBA 1995. Without further ado, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to share a brief introduction, including their background in the military, their affiliation with William & Mary, and their interests in today's topics. Over to you, General Busby.
Thank you, Bill. Again, I go by Buzz, fighter pilot, nickname. I've carried it my whole life. Flew lots of fighters throughout a very long career. 84 MBA, as Bill talked about. I served 33 plus years with IBM, retiring a couple years ago as a partner and vice president. All of my time was in the field, primarily in sales and operations. And I did 40 plus years serving in the United States military, the Air Force and the Air National Guard. Again, as a fighter pilot, retiring as a major general at Stratcom. One of my favorite assignments is where Jamar is right now, was in Kaiserslautern, Germany, where I was a forward air controller and air liaison officer, basically serving the Army and with the Army, which was a fantastic experience being over there. I still do some contract work and consulting both with the military and IBM, primarily in training new personnel and senior executives. I am passionate about transitioning and helping people transition from the military to the civilian and business world. I've been doing that as a speaker, hands-on workshops, and a lot of different areas. And so I'm delighted to be here and be a part of this. Thank you, Bill. Bill, you're on mute.
Over to you, Jamar.
All right, hello everybody. Captain Jamar Jenkins, currently serving on active duty for my civilian job, but I'm currently Major General Mohan's SIG, which is a Commander's Initiative Group, where I deal with all strategy related to Eurocom. I'm also in Army Futures Command via 75th Innovation Command, so I'm kind of the guy that operates between military and technology. In my civilian life, I'm a product manager at Cisco Systems there in San Jose, and like Buzz as well, General Busby, I am passionate about everything military and specifically how our vets can transition successfully from the military to the civilian sector.
Thanks, Jamar. That was great. Mike, over to you.
Well, thanks, and thanks. It's great to be on this panel with you guys. I'm kind of interested in what you guys are going to have to say. I graduated from Annapolis in '82, went into the nuclear submarine service, was one of the last folks to be interviewed by Admiral Rickover. He liked it so much that I had a couple of interviews with him. So that was, that's worthy of some beers and some stories later. I did 5 years in the active duty, then transitioned to the reserves, and came to work at the shipyard in Newport News in 1987, and have been through all of the different kind of corporate reorganizations that Newport News has gone through in that time. First with Tenneco, and then as an independent company, and then being acquired by Northrop Grumman. And then in 2011, I was privileged to be, and still am, the CEO of the spinoff from Northrop Grumman. So I've been basically in my steel-toed shoes for 30 some years now, in different manifestations here in the Tidewater area. You know, and so that creates a great affinity and intimacy with the Navy, having been in the Navy, and then building, our company today has built about 70% of the Navy's warships. And so we're pretty close to being in the service, but not yet still in the service. So I look forward to the conversation. I'm honored to be here with you all.
Thanks very much, Mike. And good morning and welcome, Sally.
Good morning. Thank you, Bill. I'm Sally Ryan, and I was privileged to serve in the Air Force as a Medical Service Corps officer from 1983 to 1995. I was not a pilot, but one of my fondest memories was an incentive ride in an F-16. So fabulous, down over the Keys at Homestead Air Force Base. Great time in the military. My husband was also in the Medical Service Corps, and honestly, loved every minute of it. I was in for about 12 years, and then had an opportunity to transition to the civilian market here through connections at William and Mary. So I think that that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I've enjoyed a long career in healthcare here in the Hampton Roads community as well. Currently, I serve as the Vice President of Physician Services for Riverside Health System. For those of you who live here, you know that we're a large integrated health system. We serve 5 different communities across the Hampton Roads region, cover about 8,000 square miles in our services. We have a physician and provider network of over 650 providers, and that's the scope of my responsibility here. So I look forward to the conversation and appreciate being part of it.
Thanks, Sally. And again, to all our panelists, we're honored with your expertise and your willingness to share your experiences with us. Unsurprisingly, for the Military and Veterans event, we are ahead of schedule. So I'm going to remind folks in the audience to feel free to submit questions. I expect that we'll move efficiently through those that we've proposed, but very excited now to move into a portion where I'll propose some questions and have the panelists jump in based on their own interests and experiences. So let's begin with that. I'd like to first ask all the panelists to share with us, when you transitioned from the military to your new job, what was your biggest challenge, your biggest fear, and perhaps your biggest obstacle? Buzz?
Yeah, Bill. Golly, I think the biggest challenge was, I was the world's greatest fighter pilot, and having to leave the military and come into the civilian sector was starting at zero. And while humbling, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So it was a huge challenge. My entry into IBM after William and Mary, I was 32 years old, again, serving in the Air National Guard, flying combat missions. And my peers were all just graduating from college, way smarter than I was, way better than I was, but starting at zero was probably the biggest challenge. I would say the obstacle that I think was probably the largest for me was the transition, not from the leadership or the performance, but to the core skills of whatever it is we all have to move to. We've been blessed with the ability to lead. We've been blessed with the ability to take care of our people. we understand mission, we understand all those type of things, but learning the basics of back then computing, the personal computer was just invented, and some of those things was really difficult. Now the good news was there's formal training, and we in the military love formal training, and so we ate it all up, and I ate it up. But that was that. I think my fear, maybe a lot of military people, but was looking bad and failing. We as fighter pilots, we're always having to be on, we're being graded all the time. And being the old 32, 33-year-old guy having to compete with these really bright, talented 22-year-olds that were, again, way smarter than I was a huge fear. And frankly, a fear throughout my entire career. I think part of it maybe helped a little bit, but that was a fear that I had. And again, eventually I think overcame some of it, but still have some of that today.
Thanks, Buzz. Jamar, if you're still with us, love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. And I'm still here. Just cut the video off so the audio can stream very effectively. But now, similar to what Buzz said, the things that I struggle with, I would say the top three was imposter syndrome. Right, coming from the military and going to experiences like me, and there really was none, right? And so transitioning from 10 years active duty Army, I was dealing with professional identity as well, and so that's when you got to leverage into the veteran groups that you have in a local community, reach out to those mentors, and really hire those executive coaches and people to kind of coach your way through, this significant life-changing event. So I would say those are the top three: imposter syndrome, dealing with the professional identity, and like Buzz said, dealing with the technical aspect, especially if you're switching industries and not doing something that's easily translatable from your military career.
Thanks very much, Jamar. Mike?
Yeah, so I agree with what Buzz and Jamar have already said. So to avoid repetition, I'm going to take a little bit of a different take on it, because everything they said is exactly right. You from a professional standpoint, you've got to figure out how you're going to fit in and how you're going to get qualified and earn your keep, if you will, with the team and with the group that you're there, and that will be a consuming challenge. But as I look back on the transition, I think the thing that I realize now is that, and I'm not sure people talk about so much, is there's stuff outside of your profession that you don't realize are being taken care of in the military bubble, that if you don't figure out how to take care of them, they're going to become problems for you down the road. And I'll start out with something as simple as logistics. My family and I, when we left the service, my wife and I, we had a daughter that was not yet 3. We moved from military housing in Charleston to owning a house in Newport News. You talk about a learning curve that was vertical. That was a vertical learning curve. And just one snippet of how challenging that was: about 3 months after we moved into our house, I get a frantic call at work. My wife calls me to tell me that the water people have just come and turned the water off at the house. And I said, "What water people? Why?" And they said, "Because we haven't paid our bill." And I said, "What bill?" And so they told us to go down to the office downtown. I go down to the office downtown that afternoon, and I'm talking to the manager there, and kind of a long discussion, as you might imagine. But the short of it was, we hadn't gotten our bill because all the mail was being forwarded to the previous owner's new address down in Texas. So we had never received a water bill. And the manager actually said, "When you didn't get a water bill, you should have called us, because you should have known that you weren't getting a water bill." Well, I grew up on a farm, and I lived in Navy housing, and in Annapolis I had never seen a water bill in my life. Not once had I ever seen a water bill in my life, until some guy showed up in the front yard to turn the water off. So getting the logistics straight is going to be something that no one ever talks about in this transition, but that's a critically important thing. The second thing is if you're in the service, if you think about the population of people that are in the service today, you hear the selectiveness that goes with that. You can't be recruited into the service unless you have a high school diploma, unless you are physically fit, unless you do not have a criminal record. So only about 25% of the population between the ages of 18 and 24 can actually be in the service. When you're in the service, you don't think like that. And so when you come out of the service and you start interacting with the great people that are not in the service, a lot of them wouldn't have qualified for the service. And you've got to kind of recognize that this is a different population that has its own set of strengths that are going to be different than the population you dealt with. That is a major transition for you to make as a leader, is to understand that you're not necessarily dealing with that 25%. You're dealing with the other 75%. And you're going to fall in love with those people, but you've got to make that mental transition from a leadership standpoint. And then the last thing that I would say is that your family in general, particularly if you're married, you don't realize how much your spouse is supported by the military network. And when you come out of that bubble, typically the commercial side, the private sector, there's not that kind of infrastructure to support your spouse and their families. And so, several months after you come out, there's going to be that moment of, where is everybody? And you're going to have to figure out, how are you going to do that, to strengthen your family, and how are you going to do that? Because it's not going to be the same as what you have gotten used to. So again, a little bit different take than Buzz and Jamar's, but because I agree with everything they had to say, I just want to give you kind of a different slice of it.
That was great, Mike. Thanks very much. Over to you, Sally.
Well, and I think Mike read my notes, because those are the same things I thought about over the weekend. There's an affinity and a safety net that comes with the military that is not out there. You join the military, right? It is a select few. I think only 1% of the US population is a veteran, about 10% in Virginia, but it's a very small network of families. And I thought the same thing, the safety net, you knew where to go, things were moved for you, and you had resources. When I think back on my arrival to Virginia, my husband and I, as I said, he was also military. We came to Virginia right on the heels of Desert Storm. He had been deployed. We came here thinking we'd be here about 18 months, and 28 years later, we've loved every minute of it. And one of the last things that we were part of was when Tactical Air Command moved to Air Combat Command. So there was some real clear mission and real clear alignment. And when you step out into that civilian world, you lose a little bit of that. And that's a security, that structure of security. I think that the social aspect, the social network, and Mike alluded to it for the family, but for me as a professional, the people I worked with every day in the military were the people I went to the club with on Fridays, right? They're the people I took vacation with. In the civilian sector, that's not necessarily true. I happened to take a job over on the South Side and lived over here. So all my peers at work lived on the South Side. And so I had a different structure. Not wrong, not bad. It was just a little bit different. And the other thing I've observed as I've worked in several excellent organizations here in Hampton Roads is the difference in local tenure. So, in the military, everyone's from somewhere else, and you're all learning communities together. I have team members that work for me now that have worked here at Riverside for 30 or 40 years. And that experience is just it's valuable to me. And I find that a special treasure, just to have that connection and people who were that committed to the mission of an organization, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. In terms of my profession, I'm in healthcare, and so the good news is some elements of healthcare are true, whether they're military or not, but the pace of change in the commercial industry has been rapid over my career, and that was a huge difference in the military. Very formal structure in the military. If an idea was born, went up the chain in a process that everyone knew, not so much in the commercial or private sector, right? You're moving at the pace of change in part based on the culture of the company that you're with, your leadership's style. So those were some of the things that I remember as I like to call them opportunities. Every once in a while, they might have been challenges, and maybe we stepped back and said, is this the right thing? But overall, a great transition, but clear differences. And I would agree, you just don't realize how big that network is within the military until you step out of it. So thank you.
Thanks, Sally. That was a really terrific comments, and we'll kind of forecast where we're going to head next with this discussion. So we're going to talk about fit in organizations, and we're going to talk about dynamic organizations and change. So you've given us a great way of leading into that. And so I'm going to turn now to asking Mike and Jamar, if you could discuss your thoughts on the importance of fit in successful transitions. For example, in terms of a firm's values or mission, perhaps a fit with the supervisor or your co-workers, or maybe the broader culture of the organization. Jamar?
Sure. That's a great question. And I think for me, recently transitioning from the military to the civilian sector, it's the most important, right? I think I lucked out in that, there's a lot of companies that's out there, and I was absolutely diligent about researching all the information I could find about the company's fit. But not only that, but reaching out to what connections or second connections that I have that's working that company. And what I would suggest is making sure, same Navy values, military values, Army values, Air Force values, Marine values, that you get a company that's aligned closely to those values. That will make that transition easier whenever you do make that transition. My second thought is that you know who your boss and your supervisor is, right? I think a lot of times what would be a mistake is to go into an organization not actually meeting or interviewing with the person that you'll be working for. It's really good, and I think important that you understand, who is your boss? What do they value? I think sometimes we get caught up in these leadership programs, military veterans would transition to these programs or these umbrella programs, and they'll be kind of divvied out to, where the company sees fit. I would caution against that and more so lean towards making sure that you know who your boss is, because at the end of the day, we have skill sets that's going to make us effective in any organization. And so whether I'm at Cisco or Google or selling hot dogs, I could be with anybody as long as they're good people. People work with people who are spending a lot of time, with your teammates. So try to get whatever job you're at or whatever job you're interviewing for. It's really important that you actually get to see and speak and talk with your teammates and your boss, because you got to have that good feeling before you go ahead and transition. So that's my final thoughts on that, Bill.
Thanks, Jamar. I think we're going to ask you to talk a little bit about organizational cultures and missions as well, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Jamar, and I think that the transition today can be much better informed than maybe the transition was when Buzz and I went through it. The resources and access to information is dramatically different. When I made the transition, I knew a little bit about the company. Didn't really have any great way to track down people that were there, or I knew people that might have worked on ships in the business. And so, but it was, just connecting with people was hard to do back in the 80s. And so in those days, you kind of took a chance. These days, I agree with Jamar. The more research you can do ahead of time to test the culture and the fit of the organization, the better. And I would echo, if you find yourself in the process of trying to go to work for a company and you have not yet actually interviewed your boss, you need to think about that. That's they think they're interviewing you, but what I would say to you is going through the transition is you're actually interviewing the company. the fight for talent out there, and folks coming from the service and the credentials and experience that they have, means that you're highly sought, and you have an opportunity to make a statement about what you believe in. If you find yourself in a place where the company wants you to go to work for, Joe Adams out in Arizona, but you're not going to get a chance to talk with Joe before you show up, that says something about the company that, at least in my mind, would be challenging. That's not the way it was when I came through, but I think being able to do that research ahead of time matters. If you find yourself, and I promise you, you will know right away if you are in an organization that does not align with your values. And all I would say to that is, do not walk, run. Every day you spend in an organization that is not aligned with your value set is wasting your time. And that's the one resource that you have to spend your energy on and conserve. So.
Thanks, Mike. Next question is going to relate to, I guess, change and maybe the rate of change. But given our dynamic economy, I guess in particular the importance of technology, how did you ensure that you were current and prepared for your new position? What upskilling measures did you complete, or might you suggest to transitioning service members now? Buzz?
Yeah, Bill, thanks. And I'll go back. I agree with Mike. When we went through this in the 80s, there's a lot of better things and maybe not as good now. But I think, and I am going to be malicious or whatever. The William & Mary MBA was probably one of the best things I ever did. Luckily, my wife put me through. She was a counselor at Bruton High School and did all the work while I was able to study and fly with the Guard back then. But that was my upskilling. I knew a lot about what I knew in the military. I loved the formal training in the military. It was just something I loved and ate up. And I needed that hands-on formal training. And the William & Mary MBA, and some of these folks, you might know Mike, but some of them may have been retired, but learning accounting at the tip of the point of the pencil with Dr. Geary, or statistics from Dr. Stewart, or finance from Dr. Haltner. I mean, they were busting our chops all the time, and you had to learn it. And so that was a huge upskilling, so I could speak some part of the language of business, the finance and that type of area. So that was a huge upskilling for me. The other thing, and it got me in the door from some of that area. But then the other thing was in moving into technology and into sales and into operations. And I took every chance I did, and there wasn't the internet, and there weren't things out there. I would go to the library. I looked for courses a little bit later in my career, formal PMP, professional, the project management things. IBM did a good job with it, but I felt I needed to get it outside. So I took project management courses at a community college. And so you do those things to upgrade. And even as late as 2 or 3 years ago, just before I retired, I was doing blockchain studies online because that was part of what my client and who we were consulting with. So I learned, this old dumb fighter pilot learned a little bit about blockchain. Not enough to do the programming and all that, but enough to understand the basics so I could have a conversation with, a senior business exec and the kind of things that we IBM were doing in blockchain, which helped a lot. So I think you just constantly have to do that, and having gone through that whole and still evolving today with all the things going on, you just have to constantly, improve your skills and know what's out there and kind of look forward and see what's coming and what you like. I'll go back again to Mike. If you don't like what you're doing, it's not just the company, but if you don't like what you're doing, man, when you get to where 5 or 6 of the 10 days are not good, you either got to change or you need to change. And so, those are one of the things. Changing skills was something I really enjoyed, and being in the industry we were in, it was something I loved. So I think those are the kind of things, Bill and team, that I did and continued to do well throughout my career. Thanks.
Thank you, Buzz. And Jamar, we're going to ask you to reflect on that as well, especially given your recent degree experience and then your move both into the reserves as well as to begin your corporate career.
Yeah, sure. I got to Silicon Valley with MBA, and I'm like, yes, I'm ready to take on the world. And they're like, well, you're not an engineer. So I got my SBA, and now I go back to the table with a little bit more credibility, which is it's going to lead into his point. I have a few thoughts on that, and the first main point is rebranding yourself to get the skill sets that you need to be effective, right? I had the MBA and I'm like, okay, let's go. But depending on the job, depending on the industry, you may have to get additional certificates and credentials that you need. In the military, like you said, we're always retraining. We have a lot of education at a lot of different levels, but maintain that tenacity and that lifelong learnership, if you will, is absolutely imperative to make a successful transition. I think what got you here won't get you there. And so we just as much as we're comfortable with PCS in every 2 to 3 years, you kind of got to get comfortable with rebranding yourself. I went from a logistics officer, and now I'm doing P&L for Cisco, which is highly technical, and I'm in Army Futures Command doing a little bit of acquisition there that I would say really hone in on as far as what we should do when we transition.
Thanks, Jamar.
With MBU can really hone.
I apologize. We lost you there right at the end, Jamar, but thanks for those comments. We're going to move on and talk a little bit now about a topic that military members may be less comfortable with, but networking is an important skill and an ongoing process, even if it's one that some veterans or service members may be inexperienced or uncomfortable with. I'm wondering if each of you could discuss the importance of networking, both as part of your initial transition and then your ongoing professional growth, and how might individuals develop this skill. And Sally, if it's okay, I might ask you to talk to us first about networking.
I'm happy to, Bill. And I think about that question, I realized how important is it? There is not opportunity I've had, whether it was military or civilian, that wasn't based on two things: the work I was currently doing and someone I knew. So, my lens is focus first and foremost on the job you're doing, right? That's how you're getting your credibility and your brand and competencies and learning. But it's who you know. I think I shared with this panel when we first met that my husband and I were both in the military, and it was William & Mary. It was that program, and I agree, Buzz, that it was the best thing I ever did was get my graduate do my graduate work there. But I was debating my next step in career. I was a new mom, and I was meeting all these people, and it was a classmate. She said, I'd like to give your resume to my boss. And that started the journey. And I think that keeping connection is really important, but it's genuinely liking these people and knowing them. And networking is not about what people can do for you, but it's having relationships. And so that started my journey. The role I'm in now was a phone call. What are you going to do? What are you doing next year when your youngest daughter graduates high school? I'd like to give your resume to my boss. I mean, that's the journey. And so I just think you have to be comfortable with that, building those relationships all along. I've had the good fortune to be in the other seat. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I've been with Riverside 9 years. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, a friend of mine from the Air Force, she and I were stationed at Tactical Air Command 20 years before. She contacted me. She was retiring from the Air Force, and I just made a connection for her here in the health system. And she's here today, been here 7 years. So I just think that that's the importance of it, which was the first question. How to develop it, have to say, not my strength. I've been fortunate that my small network has worked well for me. As you get into the civilian community, it's important to say yes, participate in events, extend beyond your own specialty area. So it's very important for me to know people outside of healthcare. Try to associate in projects and things in the community, particularly if you're new to the community. We talked about that earlier. I think coming to the community, we had only lived here maybe gosh, how long have we been here? Maybe, well, 3 years. So I wasn't entrenched in this region, and it took some effort to meet people that might connect me in this community. So I would say, accept that invite to the gala or to work on the Habitat for Humanity project, classes and courses. I think we've all said the MBA program is instrumental to us. Those kinds of educational programs also help, particularly if you're in a specialty field. So very, very important, a skill that never ends. In my world today, my network is, who are the experts out there that I can call on when a pandemic comes to talk about what's happening and what they're doing and how they're solving problems. Those kinds of networks continue even if you're not directly looking for a transition. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Sally. Mike, would you be willing to share a little bit of your thoughts on networking as well?
Sure. I think Bill, you actually kind of alluded to this. I'm not sure that folks that are in the service realize how much networking they're doing every day while they're in uniform. Networking is, it turns out to be, we kind of think of it as a separate activity, but it's actually sort of organic to everything that you do. And I tend to think that if you start with approaching the job that you have, kind of what Sally said, if you approach the job that you have from the standpoint of what do I do with this opportunity to make this the very best job I will ever have? And that means you might have to go get qualified. I agree with Buzz and Sally about for me, when I came out of the Navy, it was so I could go get an MBA and learn the language of business. And that was really kind of got me, I was a nuclear operator in the Navy, and I had to go and I had to learn about accounting. I broke a lot of pencils. I broke a lot of pencils in my accounting class. And but I couldn't tell you how many times I've met folks in the service who've been in the service for 25 or 30 years who transition at that point in their career, and 6 months after they've transitioned, they say, if I only knew then what I know now, the amount of things that they learn 6 months after they come across the line, if you will, it is really it's very insulated. So what do you do to make sure the job you have is the best job you'll ever have? That means to do it differently. That means to get qualified. That means to think about it differently than somebody else. Those are actually skills that you have when you're in the service. That is an organic skill that you bring with you that I think is probably less developed on the outside of the military. Inside the military, you're doing that every day, all the time. Part of that job, part of doing that means how do I become the person that helps everybody around me be better? I want to be that person that makes everybody around me better. And if that happens, you've just created a network. But you haven't thought about it as a network because you thought about it as part of your organic job. And so taking advantage of opportunities to participate in things like civic organizations or church organizations or those kinds of things, you bring that same sort of mentality to that. You're going to be on the board of the Living Museum. You say, okay, how can I make this the best opportunity that I can have to be on a board? And then how do I participate in such a way that everybody else on this board is better? Well, you just created a network of board members out there that you can tap into as you go forward. The last thing I would say, though, and this is not, I frankly would say this has been my shortcoming, but I happen to have been associated with a couple of folks who are, I would say, masters at this networking thing. And what they would tell you is that the first two things that I said are true, but then the third piece is be intentional about it. When you meet somebody new, follow up. Help them out, help them be better. Let them help you be better. It is astounding to me how natural that comes to some folks that I know that are very good at it. They'll meet somebody once, and 6 months later they'll be thick as thieves. And that's I don't necessarily have that skill. I haven't been honing that skill for for the 30 plus years of my private sector career. But I actually admire that in folks, and I would tell you, make the job you have the best one you'll ever have. Make the people around you better for you being there, and then be very intentional about maintaining those contacts. A lot easier to do now than it was back in the day, but be intentional about it.
Thanks very much. Buzz, I was going to ask you to comment on your experiences with networking as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mike and Sally. They're spot on. I'll just pick up maybe two little threads on that. One, another part of networking that I love, because I always love being with clients, is not, let's say, the internal IBM or the business, but it's the client. And I still have to this day clients that I stay in touch with that have moved through their careers, either the companies they're with or to other companies, and have been references for them as they moved on and up. And just stayed in touch with them. And one of the things that the military actually helped with was most of them were very, very interested. As Sally said, so few, 1% know about the military. And, I never went around, wearing my rank on my shoulder or my wings on my chest. They just ask, and I'd say, here's what I do on weekends. I don't go home. I go fly jets, and then they talk. And so I would get them in touch. There was a client I had in Portland, Oregon, and got him in touch with parts of the people in the Air National Guard because of some things that he was interested in. And to this day, well, his son is looking to serve, very young at the time. That was many years ago. But networking with clients is a fun thing, and it's something you love doing. And you're just meeting with friends and buds, and at the time, and then you also do professional things together. So that would be point one. Then the other one I'll pick up on Sally is networking is you've moved through or moving through your career. I still, to this day, I was fortunate when we were doing the consulting organization with Price Waterhouse. I was able to hire a whole lot of these bright young kids out of MBA and out of college to become young consultants. And boy, you talk about smart. But I really took that stuff personally. And again, to this day, unfortunately, not a lot of them, consultants move around a lot, so not a lot of them are still with IBM. But I still hear from these folks, just to catch up. How you doing? They're curious about me, and I about them. And sometimes they'll have things going on in their career and choices, and they just want another sounding board. And I always view it that, like a dad or a graybeard that, I never give them an answer, but I kind of just listen and talk and feed them questions. And I try to get out of them, what's maybe the nut or the core of what they're doing. So networking back that other way is something, it's fun. And, to this day, I just love meeting and talking and grabbing a beer or, getting on a Zoom or a FaceTime or whatever, and just seeing how they're doing. So those are two, I guess, things I would add to the thoughts here.
Thanks, Buzz. That was a terrific lead into actually our next topic, where we're going to ask folks to think a little bit about leadership development. And we're hoping to ask Sally and Mike, could you talk a little bit about leadership and leadership development in your organization? What characteristics do you think the transitioning military members are strongest on? What areas might require some adjustment or retooling? And how does your organization approach leadership development compared to the military? Sally, would you be willing to take the first crack at that?
Sure, I'm happy to. So, Riverside's a large organization. We have about 10,000 members, and I would say proudly that we are veteran friendly. We support veteran employment. We have a number of physicians and team members throughout the organization who deploy throughout the year. They're in the Guard or Reserve. Some of our leaders have military backgrounds. So we value that richly, and also serve in support of TRICARE and the VA in a way I think a lot of entities do in healthcare. So we have a strong connection. In terms of leadership, we do have very formal programs. I think the question was, how's it like the military? Well, we have programs similar to the military. We have an Emerging Leaders Academy, and I would say that we actually have some preference to our new veteran hires to participate in that because their experience in leadership adds to the class. They contribute that way. So our Emerging Leaders Academy is one formal program. We also have formal programs related to your career area within the organization. So not unlike in the Air Force, squadron officer school or command school, and it kind of went with your role and your grade and your time. A little bit different in the civilian world is that there's not the grade and time necessarily tied to it. It's really performance, recommendation from your supervisors, and or your own interest. We have programs like we do Lean Six Sigma training. You can get your belt. We do change acceleration program, CAP, change management training. Anybody in the organization can participate in that. And then we also have technical skills like Excel training. So there are a lot of opportunities. We have mentors and advisors that we can assign team members to help them through their journey. When it comes to, how does the military experience add that leadership experience? Certainly, there's no better experience for a formal, very clear leadership guide. And I thought about it just the other day, really with this pandemic that we're dealing with, healthcare organizations. So it is certainly top of my mind. We moved immediately to an incident command structure, very military based, right? Our president and COO is former Army. So it was very clear. And when you have an unclear situation, that kind of leadership matters, right? Clear command and control, clear decision making, clear lines of authority. And so I think that that experience in the military plays very well in any organization, particularly in times where you are either making rapid change, responding to something that has unclear consequences. And so I've actually seen it over the last 7 months, and I'm very proud of the work, our organization. I've been so impressed with our executive leadership and how they've handled it. But that incident command and control was very structured, much like many of the command centers I experienced in the military. I think where sometimes it's hard, and I've actually coached some folks who've joined Riverside, there is no rank in civilian organizations. Sometimes there is a formal structure and it's really clear, but in collaborative environments, sometimes that goes away. And individuals who in the military, perhaps, I think Jamar may have used the phrase imposter syndrome, right? Maybe people who use their rank to manage their leadership style in the military, when that goes away, they struggle a little bit. So you have to have that confidence in your role in your leadership, regardless of what you have on your shoulder. And so I think sometimes that transition is hard when you first come out, because you have to navigate that a little bit differently. But we're a large organization. About 5% of our organization is veteran. And so we have pockets of that leadership that help us along the way.
Thanks, Sally. Mike, would love to hear your thoughts on leadership and development within your organization.
Sure. Let me just start with, if you were ever in the service, you have an understanding that leadership is a craft, just like what your MOS was. Buzz, you say you're a fighter pilot. Yeah, you were a fighter pilot, but you were also a leader. And I think that in the service environment, you understand that leadership is a professional craft, just like welding, just like electronics, just like anything else. And as a professional craft, you need to study it, and you need to think about it, and you need to practice it, and you need to interact with other leaders to learn how to do that better. What I have an interesting observation, and I would wonder if the other panel members have ever seen this too. Sometimes I'll stand in front of a group and I will just ask them, when did you learn the difference between accountability and authority? And what I get is a portion of the room will look me right in the eye and they will start smiling. And the rest of the room will either start looking at the ceiling or looking at their shoes. Now, the folks that are looking at me, what they are thinking about is their first day of boot camp, or their first day of plebe summer, or whatever their initiation into the service was. They remember that day. They remember the gunnery sergeant that woke them up that morning and told them, you're in the Navy now. I mean, I can tell you exactly what happened that day, minute by minute. And everybody who's ever been through that has that experience. If you haven't been through that, though, you start looking at the ceiling or looking at the floor and say, gosh, what is the difference between authority and accountability? And I sure hope he doesn't call on me. And so my view of this has been that, and I've seen an evolution of this over 30 some years. 30 years ago, I don't think the private sector really understood accountability in general as an institution, as an institutional process in your organization. I think the private sector is a lot better at that today. But you're coming into an environment where you understand you have an advantage. You understand that leadership is a craft that has to be practiced and has to be honed and developed and rehearsed and mixed up with. And it's kind of like you can't learn to swim without getting in the pool. You have to lead to be a good leader. And in organizations where accountability is slippery or authority is vague, you actually have a chance to cut through a lot of that, because you're going to require that. Today, people will bring me new organization charts, for instance. When they first started doing that and say, we want to reorganize, and we want to put Joe over here, and we want to have Buzz do this, and Bill do that, and Sally do this, I would step back and say, take all the names out. Now show me in the boxes how authority and accountability are going to flow. And if you can show me how authority and accountability are going to flow through this box diagram that you have, then we can talk about names. So now nobody ever brings me those charts with names in them anymore. They bring me authority and accountability charts. So that's been a transition in our culture, starting at the shipyard in Newport News, but now for HII, where we are very intentional around leadership as a craft. We generally believe that nobody in the company is seeing a challenge that somebody else in the company hasn't seen before. So we try to create opportunities for leaders to network, whether it's through case studies or classroom environments or caucus things. We try to give our leaders an opportunity to take advantage of what the rest of the leaders in the organization know. It's a kind of a crowdsourcing of leadership, if you will. But we are significantly and substantially better at leadership today than we were 30 years ago, because we are very intentional about that. And you, as a service member, you're coming into a private sector that understands now the value of leadership much more than it did 30 years ago, and you'll have an opportunity to excel and shine in that environment.
Thanks, Mike. We have one more question for the panel, which I'm going to ask them to weigh in on at the very end, very briefly, which would just be to tell us, looking back on your transition, what would you have done differently? So I'm going to ask you to all think about that, but we're going to do that very briefly. I wanted to turn for just a moment to some of the questions that have been proposed in our chat. So appreciate the participants submitting some questions. I'm going to try to pull two of them together and ask you, Jamar, if you'd be willing to comment. But some of the folks are asking, how common is it for service members who are transitioning, if they have a degree, to potentially be undervalued? And how might we remedy that? Or how can someone take on that challenge if they feel perhaps undervalued? And a similar idea, but for those who don't have a degree but want to, what's the right timing? So folks are saying, if I'm in a new job, I'm trying to learn the job, is that the right time to take on the MBA? So if you might think about both of those, Jamar, I guess in light of your recent experiences, I think that'd be really helpful.
Sure. No, those are two great points. And I have to give kudos for whoever thought those questions up, because those are two tough questions, right? Very, very tough questions. I'll answer the latter. When is the right time? There's never a great time. Right? There's never going to be the right time, right? So whenever I got my MBA, I was, handling all the, if you will, the mental agility of coming to a new industry, a new company, a new city, and decided to get my MSBA from William & Mary as well. I was going through a lot. It was a lot that was going on, but I knew there would never be the perfect time to do it, right? And so sometimes, you soldier up, right? You military up, and you just knock it out. If what you need, if you need to get that credential, that education, that certification to get you where you need to go, you know, like anything in life, it's going to be a sacrifice, right? And if you have a family, it should definitely be, you know, I would say a family decision, because you're going to need that support. But if it's what you need to get to where you got to go, there's no time like now. So the right time is now. If you're debating it, go in there and do it, right? To the first question, that is a very tough question, because a lot of us leave the military. My colleagues left the military at captain rank, 03 rank, if you will, with the MBA, with 6 to 8 years experience. And you're looking at, you know, how much am I worth? You know, how much am I worth? And so, to be honest, Bill, I don't mean to punt this question to other panel members, but I have to be honest. I would be curious to what Mike, Sally, and even Buzz has to say, as far as, and this is something I struggle with, how do you dictate your worth to the civilian sector whenever you're a recently new MBA graduate with maybe 6 years of leadership experience? Like, how much of a salary do you command? Who helps you with that? For me, I had an executive coach to kind of help me through that and kind of guesstimated, and I kind of asked for the world, probably too high. I'm not saying, you know, other members, you know, should do that, but I'm kind of curious from, you know, from Mike and Sally and Buzz and the folks with way more wisdom than Jamar, their thoughts on that, if that's okay with you, Bill.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. We've got a few minutes left, and it'd be great that we kind of wrap up on the note of looking backwards. But Sally and Mike, do you have I guess, a relatively concise way of telling us how you think about being valued appropriately or demonstrating your value?
Well, I would say, you know, a couple of things. First, it's timing on when you get your higher education really is very individual. One of my first bosses in the military, I wanted to go get my master's, and I'd only been in the service a couple of years. He said, "You'll contribute more to the program will be more valuable to you if you wait and get some experience. The questions you ask will just be better." So that was great advice for me. But I ended up getting my master's. I had my second child. I delivered my second child 3 days after my finance midterm at William & Mary. She is now an accounting and finance expert. So I think that's how that works out on timing. I think when you consider it, at least in large organizations, just bear this in mind. The first thing that is valued is the role, not you as a person, right? So they've taken a position and they've said the body of work and the credentials required for this position is worth X, right? Because they've got other people in those positions. So just be mindful of that in large organizations, there's scales and positioning, just like in the military and civil service. So make sure that the role that you are applying for resonates with, you know, what you're expecting. Now, I would also say, and my last little comment was, I walked through the door that I was given, right? Just sometimes you have to start that journey. And so you may start at a level that you think is not where you want to be, but it's the organization that you want to be part of. It's the culture that you want to be a part of. But just always bear in mind, they're not necessarily just valuing you, right? They're valuing the role that you've applied for. And there may be a difference in that. I've worked and I've seen and I've read lots of resumes, mine included, where I took my job and tried to change, chief of staff or executive officer to chief of staff to something materially usable in a civilian sector. And all of that works. The conversation you have with the hiring manager and supervisor helps clear that road. But when it comes to valuing you and your experience, I just caution that organizations, large ones, are valuing the role too. I hope that's helpful, because it's not just that you've got 8 years of experience and you've got a master's, but if you're applying for a manager role that doesn't require that, or there are 20 others, there's going to be a scale that falls within. And then you can navigate up that for sure based on that experience. But that was an important lesson for me as I've matured in the civilian market on how jobs are valued in terms of compensation and benefits. And that's, you know, those are sort of the mid-level, upper management, not executive roles necessarily. So I hope that helped.
Yeah, I thought it was great, Sally. Thanks very much. Mike, I'll give you a chance to weigh in on that if you have something you want to add. Otherwise, we might move to that final question of, you know, like what you might change about your own transition. So over to you.
I wouldn't, if you don't mind, Bill. I think there's something really important here to talk about, because I think Sally's got it right. You know, don't forget that there's lots of lenses. You're looking through the lens of where you're going and how you're going to decide where to go, and am I being appropriately valued and all that stuff. And Sally points out that, you know, the organization is looking through the lens of, hey, this is what this role is worth to us from a value standpoint. And you're looking for some kind of intersection there. My advice to the folks that are making this transition, if you're thinking about that and you're letting that part of it drive the kind of decision that you're going to make, that means you're not thinking about something else. I mean, there's a bandwidth issue there. And I would offer that you should be thinking more about what kind of job do I want? What does that look like? What does a good job for me entail? Do I have, if I'm looking for growth, is this position going to give me an opportunity to grow? And if I'm looking for leadership opportunity, is this a place that's going to give me a chance to lead? I can't tell you how many people I've seen take the job that was going to pay them the most and turn out to be the most unhappy. So, you know, I appreciate the question because I know it's front and center. In my own experience, I can tell you that I took a pretty dramatic pay cut to come out of the Navy because I felt like the opportunity, the overall holistic opportunity for me and my family here in Hampton Roads. My wife was from Franklin, Virginia. The opportunity to go to William & Mary and get my MBA, those things all balanced out. And I said, you know what, I can work on the waterfront for a few years while I do that. And I got my MBA in the part-time program. And I don't know that when I went in, I never thought that I would be, you know, in the shipyard or in this business for as long as I have been. But what happens is if you've got all of those things working for you, the compensation is going to work itself out. You know, it is going to work itself out. And so don't pay an inordinate amount of time to the compensation on the front end at the expense of those other things. Because if you can get the highest paying job and not be very happy with it and not have the opportunities that you're going to need down the road. So spend more time thinking about the overall issue and less time about the compensation number itself. And I'll stop there.
That was great, Mike. And I think a terrific place for us to finish. I'd like to, again, thank all of our panelists, Buzz, Javar, Mike, and Sally for sharing your experiences and ideas with us. We sincerely appreciate your continued service to your fellow veterans, as well as to the William & Mary and Mason School communities. I mentioned at the outset of our event that William & Mary is fortunate to be expanding and improving its services and opportunities for military and veteran students under the Veteran to Executive Transition Program and the Mason Center for Veteran Transitions. Programs like those, as well as our event today, are a hallmark of William & Mary's service ethos. I think we're all fortunate to live and work in a community that's so dedicated to those who have served and who are serving. I'm confident that I speak for many when I say that we're excited to see how these programs will flourish and grow. And just want to conclude today's events by once again thanking our panelists, the organizers of the event, and everyone who attended. So go Tribe.